Hi, I'm Ralph Preston. William Lowe and I are back again to do another roadmap. This week, we're going to talk about bed exercises and some other things that you can do early on, shortly after you've had your stroke, to uh, get moving and prepare yourself for what you got ahead, things like walking and such. There's some fairly simple things that you can do in bed or alongside the bed that can help you get going and build up or maintain or build up some of the muscles that you're going to need for the rest of your recovery. William, I know you had some thoughts on this that you were going to start us off with, so why don't you go ahead and do that?
Yeah, sure. So this uh I think that this topic is really important when it comes to recovery after stroke. Um, because it basically, if you do it right, it can give you a head start in your recovery after stroke. So bedside exercises or bed exercises are basically exercises which you can do in the early days of your recovery after stroke. Well, actually, especially in the early days of your recovery after stroke, because these exercises allow you to capitalize on the time that you spend when maybe you're in a situation or place in your recovery where maybe you don't have as much mobility or limited mobility, and maybe walking might be a little bit too dangerous for you, or maybe it might result in a higher risk of falling. So I think that bed exercises are especially important when it comes to the early days of the recovery, but not only that, they also apply to you. Let's say if you've run out of insurance and you find that you're not yet ready to walk by yourself, but you're able to stay in bed um, and have the capacity to do exercises while you're lying down. So So bed exercises are really important because they allow you to essentially teach your brain how to strengthen up some of the muscles which are used when it comes to learning how to walk, especially muscles such as obviously your core muscles, because as we know, your core is paramount when it comes to walking, and it plays a huge role when it comes to teaching your brain how to distribute equal weight across both sides of your body whenever you're learning how to walk. So if you can do exercises while you're lying down in the bed, especially early on in your recovery after stroke, what you can do is you can teach your brain to strengthen up some of those muscles or retain some of that core strength which you had before your stroke, rather than being in a situation where you've just had a stroke and you're lying down in your bed and you're allowing some of those muscles which might have been used for walking to atrophy and weaken due to lack of use. And as the saying goes in recovery after stroke, you've got to use it or lose it. And in this case, especially especially if you've just had a stroke and you're in the rehab hospital, if you're serious about your recovery and you want to, let's say, get the ball rolling in your recovery and get some early improvements going, I would encourage that you really take heart to what Ralph and I are going to be discussing in this segment of the roadmap, because bedside exercises, they will be a very useful tool in your stroke recovery toolbox should you use them to your advantage in your recovery after stroke. So, so we've covered why they're important. And bed exercises, basically, what they do is they allow you to preserve the blueprint in the brain, which is used to allow you to walk in your recovery after stroke. Now, earlier, Ralph, you and I, we were talking about some examples of bedside exercises, which we both did in our recovery after stroke. I just want to toss it back to you, and maybe you could shed light on some of these exercises, and we could talk about how these exercises relate to recovery after stroke and why they're so important.
Okay. Um, I did a limited amount of exercises in bed. Um, in my recovery since then, and making videos, I've also adapted a number of things to the bed, because even though I didn't do them, just like I adapt a lot of stuff, because there are people out there that need the adaptations and can't do much outside of being in the bed. There are a lot of good core exercises that you can do, and they're typically done, and I do them on the ground, but I'm able to get down on the ground and get back up. So I do them on a exercise mat. But you can do them in bed. I have, and I've filmed them in bed. Three that come to mind to me are bridges, clamshells, and planks. Planks are fairly high level. You're more likely to be able to do a bridge or a clamshell before you're going to do a plank. But you can actually start, let's maybe back it up a little bit, because you can actually start moving in the bed when you really can't even get out of the bed or do much moving at all. William, I think you brought up, I don't remember, think you brought it up when you were talking, but earlier you talked about rolling. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is just any kind of movement. You know, like if you move your arm, your affected arm you don't have to do snow angels necessarily, but if you move your affected arm in this plane on the bed, you're not fighting gravity. So a lot of things that you can do are don't involve gravity. You can also do simple things like try and lift your affected leg, or try and rotate your ankles. We on land, you sit typically in a chair and with your heels on the ground and rotate your ankles. But you can do it in bed. You can do a simple leg lift with your knees straight. There's a lot of things you can do, but the point of all of this would be, we kind of preach, get moving and keep moving, and this would be a way to get the process started while you're still in bed. So many people I see wait for physical therapy, wait to get out of the hospital. You have physical therapy in the hospital. But a lot of people, when I was in the hospital, I didn't see anybody doing anything between sessions. I booked myself up with 6 sessions, 6 hours a day. So I did limited amounts, but so the back to the point is, if you're laying in bed, it doesn't mean that you're stuck. It doesn't mean that you can't work on things. You don't have to wait till you get out of the hospital to work on your own program. You don't have to wait till you get into outpatient physical therapy to ask them what to do. There isn't any really kind of wrong movement in stroke recovery unless you do something that's unsafe, or unless you do something like play into a problem you have, like hyperextending your knee. You'd want to avoid any exercises that made that worse, just like you'd want to avoid any exercises that weren't safe for you yet. Safety is a big issue. You don't want to fall, because you can get hurt, but you end up hurting your confidence a lot more than anything else. So those are some basics I know about. So William, I'll toss it back to you, and you can share some of the other thoughts you have on this subject.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said, Ralph. And I just want to highlight the idea of, capitalizing on your movement and not waiting for the physical therapist, because I think, given that the consensus is that the most recovery happens after stroke in the first 6 months, if you really want to see improvements quickly, you've got to keep moving and you've got to stay active as soon as possible. It's very easy, because of obviously fatigue after stroke, to allow yourself to remain remain not as active after you've had the stroke compared to how active you were before your stroke. But the key to recovery and the most positive and 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 the stroke survivors who have been able to get the most positive outcomes in their recovery have been the ones who have really kept moving in their recovery after stroke and really taken every opportunity to make sure that they can teach their brain how to get back to where they were before stroke. And this basically involves exposing their brain to an environment where they're forced to exercise all the time to strengthen it, to obviously get that function back and that strength back, so that they can reach their goals, whether this be returning to walking or whether this be getting back use of their arm. So I think when it comes to bed exercises, especially in the early days of recovery after stroke, let's say if you're in the rehab hospital, if you're in a situation where you're lying down in bed, you can use these opportunities to encourage your brain to get some movement by turning over in bed, rolling over. And what rolling over actually does is that it actually allows you to encourage the brain to send signals to engage the core muscles, which we know are important in walking. And what you'll find is that when you're doing exercise in bed, this will actually translate to teaching your brain how to walk. And obviously, when you have access to a physical therapist, it can allow you to see more improvements while they're helping you along the way. So I think that's one of the key exercises when it comes to performing exercise on the bed. Another exercise which you could do is obviously your bridges. And bridge exercises are great because when you're in hospital, you don't have the strength in your affected leg to obviously lift it up. But if you can prop up both of your legs so that they're perched up at a 90-degree angle, you can have someone, let's say a family member, press down on both your feet, allowing you to get in a bridge position where you're like that, and you can push up on both feet. And what this does is it allows you to perform an exercise, a bridge exercise, which has been shown to be beneficial for your core muscles and also in strengthening up some of the glute muscles, which are obviously important when it comes to walking, especially when it comes to stabilizing the weight of your body as it translates over from one leg to the other. So all in all, I would say those are some examples of things you can do when you're in bed. Another one, Ralph, I believe you mentioned, was your leg lifts. And I think leg lifts are also equally as important because leg lifts can actually encourage your brain to send signals over to strengthen up some of the muscles on the affected side of the body. Because we know that your brain obviously has cross communication between both hemispheres, your right hemisphere and your left hemisphere. Some parts of your body are shared across both hemispheres. For example, these might be your core muscles, which is the reason why you have a 6-pack and not a 3-pack. The same thing applies to your to some of the muscles which are closest to your pelvis. These muscles are also shared across both sides of your body. So when you're performing a leg lift, what you're doing is you're engaging the non-affected side of your body. And by engaging the muscles on the non-affected side of your body, especially the muscles which are closest to your hip, you're also engaging the part of the brain which is shared across the other hemisphere, which controls the muscles closest to your hip on your affected leg or your affected side. And what leg lifts can do is, because of this cross communication, let's say if you're performing leg lifts on your non-affected side, it can encourage your brain to send signals to turn on some of the muscles on your affected leg, which allow you to lift up your affected leg a lot more efficiently than before. And I think these are really important. Just to sum up, these are all really important because if you're in the early days of your stroke recovery, and let's say you're a little bit discouraged and you're not really sure where to go, and you need some reassurance that recovery is possible, that your brain can actually wake up, you can actually do bed exercises to get those signals going. And the good thing about bed exercises is the bed actually stops you from cheating or compensating, because the bad thing about doing exercise while you're standing up is A, it increases the risk of falling, and number two, because you're going against the effects of gravity, it allows you to compensate with your trunk, which is the reason why so many stroke survivors, whenever they're walking, they might swing their affected leg around in order to get it forward. When you do exercise on the bed, you have the back of the bed to stop you from doing that, because you can't turn everything on upstairs or above your hip to actually lift up your leg, but rather the back of your bed is going to stop your body from cheating and turning on more muscles than necessary to perform or send signals to the correct muscle to turn it on, so that you can actually teach your brain to walk a lot better when you're actually standing up. So all in all, I would say these are some examples of bed exercise which you can do when it comes to your recovery after stroke, especially in the early days of your recovery, where you might find you've got limited mobility and it's a risk for you to stand up and try to attempt to walk by yourself. Having said that, if you've run out of insurance and you've been discharged and you're still in a situation where, let's say you're in a wheelchair and you have limited mobility, you could have a crack at these exercises, some of the exercises which Ralph and I have discussed, and they can be equally beneficial to your recovery after stroke, because we know that recovery after stroke doesn't stop ever. Neuroplasticity is ongoing, and every little bit helps, no matter what exercise. As long as you're encouraging your brain to move or your body to move, your brain will connect the dots when you're sleeping, and help wake up some of those parts of the brain which might have been damaged or asleep ever since you've had your stroke. So that's basically everything I have to share with the examples of exercise you can do and why they're important and how these can help you in your recovery. I just wanted to toss it back to you, Ralph. Did you have any additional thoughts to share with the people watching?
Yeah, I actually wrote down neuroplasticity, but you just brought it up. I mean, that's what you're dealing with. I didn't know anything about neuroplasticity. I mean, I heard the whole thing about you only get better for so many months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years. And I didn't believe it, but I didn't know that the reason behind that is you do more spontaneous healing through neuroplasticity the first 6 months. So that's where the 6 months come from. So drop back just for a second, and this is the reason that William and I are always encouraging people to get moving and try and stay moving. Imagine if you were in the rehab hospital and you didn't do anything but watch TV between your therapy. That takes about a month. Then they send you home, and eventually outpatient physical therapy calls you. That takes a few weeks to a month. And then you go in there and you still haven't started any kind of exercise program for yourself. And, it takes a few months to run out of insurance, let's say 3 months. Okay, now you're 5 months on 6 months of this neuroplasticity. You get extra neuroplasticity you get in the first 6 months, and you haven't taken advantage of it. So that's the reason we harp on this, is because I didn't get to take as much advantage of that as I could have if I had known more. So we're trying to pass on some knowledge to you. One thing I didn't mention is kind of scooting or scooching around on the bed. That's one of the hardest things to learn how to do. It involves involves both limbs, both your arms, both your legs, but it involves your affected arm, your affected leg. It's good core exercise. It takes a long time. It took me a while to get to where I could move sideways on the bed. And it's important, if you ever want to stand up, you have to move to the side, then learn how to put your feet over and sit yourself up, and eventually do the sit to stand. One thing I wanted to bring up real quickly was when I filmed bridges and planks, and not planks, when I filmed bridges, and particularly, William, you were mentioning get somebody to hold your feet. I'm a big believer in trying to figure out how to do things yourself, so you don't need somebody to hold anything or do anything with you. That way you can do more than if you're dependent on somebody else. And I found I took off my sneakers when I got on the bed, and I found my socks slipped, and there were 2 solutions to that. I got a piece of Dyson and put it under my socks, and that worked. That kept my feet from slipping, so I didn't need anybody to hold them. And the other thing was I just took my socks off, because the socks on the bedspread are slippery, and your sweaty feet on the bedspread apparently aren't as slippery. So those are a couple of things. One other thing, we won't get into it. Maybe we should do another segment on this. Is the fact that you can do a lot of not necessarily the same exercises, but you can apply this theory of getting moving and staying moving early on in your recovery to wheelchair. There are a number of things that you can do in your wheelchair, and we're not going to have time to get into that tonight. So maybe we should do another segment on this early recovery process, William, and cover wheelchair exercises. There's people that wait around before they start their own program. I think it takes them longer than people who jump on it. The people I see jumping on their recovery get better faster. I mean, it takes them less time. Not only do they start earlier, but they can oftentimes, because they're taking advantage of neuroplasticity. I have one friend who got it all done in 6 months. I got it pretty much done in a year by jumping on it. So that's why we harp on this, and that's our advice, my advice at least. William, you have anything else before we close this out?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just one more thing. And this is sort of an add-on to the whole idea of bedside exercise, is that all of the exercises which we talked about in this segment, they don't have to be on the bed, although most of them are on the bed. But essentially, what you can do when you go home, and this also applies in the hospital, is you can actually use your bed as a really helpful tool in your recovery after stroke. For example, I know some of the stroke survivors which I coach personally, they have rails installed on their bed, and they use these rails as grab rails to help them perform bedside exercise, where they would perform their marches to help teach their brain how to walk a lot better and develop a better gait. And obviously, they would also use these rails to help teach their brain how to get a sense of balance. You could balance on one leg, you could balance on one leg while lifting up the other leg. You could do some marching just to capitalize with what you've got. And you can also do some walking alongside the bed as well. Obviously, having your hand hover over the rail, or maybe even touching the rail with just one finger, just to get a sense of balance and just give yourself that reassurance. Let's say if you're at a high risk of falling, that you've got something to hold on to catch yourself in case you do fall. So I think you have to get creative with this. Some of the exercises Ralph and we've discussed here in this segment of Roadmap, they're especially useful when it comes to the early days of your recovery, when you're stuck in bed and you've got nothing to do, because they engage your core and they allow you to wake up those parts of the brain and preserve some of that strength, some of that core strength which you had before your stroke, so that the muscles don't atrophy and weaken. Because if you're lying in the hospital bed after your stroke for, let's say, weeks on end, very soon some of those signals which your brain uses to send to those muscles, they're going to weaken and they're going to die, because your brain only prioritizes muscles and signals which it's firing and sending off on a very frequent basis. And if you don't fire those signals or at a regular basis, then you're going to lose those signals to those muscles. And when you lose those signals, then those muscles are going to get weaker, and your recovery is going to take a lot longer, and it's going to be a lot harder for you to teach your brain how to get back to walking. And in saying that the best possible recovery after you've had your stroke. So that's basically everything I had to cover. I mean, on that note, perhaps later on, Ralph, you and we could do a discussion on how to actually modify your home so that it encourages you to do more therapy with things such as grab rails, to allow you to basically have an environment built to help you improve your recovery and achieve your best recovery possible after you've had a stroke. That might be something which we could discuss further on. But other than that, I think that's everything I wanted to cover on my end, and that was the only thing I want to add. I hope that everyone who watched this segment found it beneficial, and please take some of this to heart, because especially if you've just had a stroke, or even if you're in the rehab hospital watching this right now, if you're lying down, you could do some of these exercises while you're watching this, or you could do some of these exercises while you're watching TV. And you might find that the next time you're with your physical therapist, when you're walking, you might walk a little bit better because you put in that extra work after hours doing some of these exercises to send those signals through to some of those muscles, such as your core muscles, which are especially relevant when it comes to returning to walking after stroke.
I'm glad you used that word modify, because I was going to say something like, um, we can't tell you exactly what to do because we're not familiar with your situation, your bed, your house, whatever. The people that do best are those that figure out how to modify things to make them work for themselves. So, you know, be that person if you can. So that's pretty much it. We got two more topics out of this discussion. One is modifications you can make around your house to improve your ability to exercise, and the other one was similar to this, only wheelchair instead of bed. So we'll try and bring you those in the future, along with any other topics that we come up with, and we will also do regular kind of surveys or ask questions for your input, and you're always welcome to put your input down below this video in the comments, things you'd like to see, things you liked about the videos that we do. So that's it from here, William. Thank you very much, as usual.
No problem, Ralph. Thank you.
All right, we'll see everybody on the next roadmap.